When did a feeling of, we need to get out of here immediately, save you? I was getting a beer with a friend, and he brought along his friend. When we left, I felt very drunk, despite only having 2 drinks. They wanted me to come to their hotel as they were getting ready for a concert that night, but I made the excuse that I needed to get home because I thought I left my oven on. My drink was tampered with. I felt like my vision was constricted, like looking through a tunnel. After getting home in an Uber, I started throwing up and continued all through the night. If you're not feeling well at any point, freaking go home. Story 2. I went to a convenience store late at night because they sold wine. I used to work odd hours, and sometimes after finishing work late at night, I wanted to have a few drinks. As I was getting back in my truck, this young girl asked if I could give her a ride a few blocks back to her home. I didn't think it was a good idea to judge a book by its cover, but she looked young and dressed nicely, and didn't act strangely, so I thought, okay, I'm going back. Then, we reached a rough part of town and she told me to turn left. It was a very dark street. I stopped and she expressed her gratitude for the ride, mentioning that she wanted to do something for me. She offered to help me out, but I declined and started feeling uneasy. Like she needs to get out now, she gets out and closes the door as I drive away. 2 men dressed in dark clothing were just stepping towards the street and stared at me as I drove past. Pretty sure that would have ended with a gun in my face. That's what you get for being nice sometimes. Story 3. It's all just speculation because we never actually got kidnapped, but when I was 19 and traveling alone in Europe, I met this Australian girl in Spain who was also about 18, and then we traveled to Italy together. We're both small, petite women, and we were desperate for a place to stay. We missed our initial ferry from Barcelona, so we had to catch the next one. When we got to Italy, our train was several hours late, and we didn't arrive in Rome until around 1 to 2 a.m. We navigated the sketchy streets by the Termini train station and finally found our hostel. The check-in lobby was a small, dingy room that appeared to be a closet. The man working reception looked us up and down and told us there was no room for us anywhere since we were late, but suggested we stay in their sister hotel. Feeling desperate, we reluctantly agreed. He led us downstairs to the alley where we were met by a burly man in shabby clothes. They conversed in a language unfamiliar to us, then ushered us outside. We strolled through a couple of narrow alleys until we reached an unmarked door on the side of a building. One of the men placed a phone call, speaking in a different language once again. We found it peculiar since everyone seemed to be fluent in English, yet they opted to converse in an unfamiliar language. A man cautiously peeked outside, then fully opened the door and ushered us in after seeing the other men. We descended the stairs into a sunken room illuminated by black lights. At that point, it was just my friend, me, and 3 burly men. The reception was a dirty room containing a couch with some dirty sheets laid over it. They told us the rooms were in the basement and to follow them. We walked down a set of stairs, 1 man in front followed by my friend, followed by another man behind her, followed by myself, and the last man behind me. We descended 1 flight of stairs only to discover another set of stairs leading to a closed door. At that moment, I couldn't handle it anymore, so my friend and I pushed past the men and hurried back upstairs. The men kept yelling that the rooms were downstairs. But the whole situation seemed too chaotic. We eventually found an Australian couple on the street who brought us to their expensive hotel where we booked a room. The next day we searched the internet for the sister hotel they brought us to, but can't remember the name they gave us. We found the hostel online, but it was very clear that this wasn't where they brought us. The hostel was supposed to have great views of the city, but we ended up in a dark, dirty basement that felt creepy. We were worried that something bad might happen to us that night. That many creepy men in different doors and hallways and paths and locations, and then they make you walk down several flights of stairs. I mean, the cardio alone is scary enough, but good God, glad you got out of there. Story 4. A friend and I had just seen a midnight movie. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I pulled into a gas station to grab a Yoo-hoo. I grabbed the bottle, turned around, and saw 3 men enter the store together. 1 waited by the doors, 1 stood near the register looking at chips, and the 3rd was crouched down with his back to the employee door so the cashier wouldn't see him through the square window in the door. They all look at me at once and then try to ignore me, acting like they're just casually positioned around the cashier and door. I walked up to the counter and put my drink down. The cashier gestured for me to scan it myself, so I did. I then left the store, trying to act as normal as possible. Once I got to my car, I tossed my drink to my friend and pressed the emergency button, which called 911. I connected with dispatch and reported a possible robbery. A mile or 2 later I see a cop car flying down the street in the direction we just came. I called non-emergency the next day to ask what happened, and they said the men fled after I left and the cashier told the police he knew he was about to get robbed too and to thank me for calling the police. Wow, that was great. But my friend, looking all jittery, seemed uneasy as he heard me describing everything to dispatch. It was as if I had just handed him a random drink and he gulped it down like a hungry baby sucking on a bottle. Edit. Lots of people asking what Yoo-hoo is. It's a drink in the US that tastes like watery chocolate milk. But shut up, it's delicious. Also, people asked about what kind of car I had with the emergency button. It was a 2002 Chevy. When I was around 11 or 12 years old, I was at a neighbor's house. I've been thinking about it recently because my new 2020 Subaru has a service similar to the one I remember from GM cars called OnStar. In my Subaru, it's called Starlink. The sun had already set. It wasn't completely dark yet, but it was close and there was less light by the second. We were sitting on the lawn because we loved watching the sky turn from day to night, just talking and giggling and carrying on as little girls do. A large vehicle drove down our street, moving more slowly than usual but not alarmingly slow. Despite this, I suddenly felt very uneasy without quite understanding why. A couple minutes later it passed by again, and then again after another few minutes, though not quite as slow this time. I was 100% positive it was the same truck, so I watched it drive away and noticed it started slowing down. I told her to get up, and when the truck made another U-turn and started heading towards us again, I told her to run and hide. We got separated while trying to hide, with her hiding behind a bush and me crouching behind an old car in the driveway. Even though we could see each other and I could easily run to the door for help, we heard a truck pull up and stop in front of her house. Someone got out of the truck and started calling for us. I honestly don't remember what they were asking though. We just kept our eyes locked and tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. The two of us were so frightened that we couldn't even bring ourselves to scream. Eventually, the person got into their car and drove away. We stayed hidden for what seemed like an eternity, our eyes locked in fear, until we finally felt safe enough to dash inside. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't noticed something and we booked it, or if that person was dangerous or not, but I'm glad that I'll never find out. Story 6. Not my feeling, but whatever. It was at a goose fair in Nottingham in the early 2000s. I was out taking pictures for my art course, and my then boyfriend thought he was a tough guy, always acting like he had some sort of combat training. After about 20 minutes, he insisted that we leave, claiming that things were about to get rough. I just rolled my eyes and thought, whatever, dude, and agreed to leave. I saw in the news the next day that a 14-year-old girl was shot dead there not long after we left. I don't know what kind of training he had, like the fact that she had to eye roll and kind of, write it off, but clearly whatever his intel was, it was good. That sucks. Story 7. I found myself at a wild house party during high school, and things were getting out of hand. There were a lot of people causing chaos, and I just had a bad feeling about it. I suggested to my friends that we should leave, but none of them would listen to me. I vividly remember making my way to my car, and as soon as I got in, the cops showed up. I ducked down and waited for them to get up to the front door and just drove off without them even noticing. Several of my friends spent the night in jail or hiding in the woods that night. I slept comfortably in my bed. Story 8. While hiking and geocaching in northern Michigan, we encountered some quite rural areas. We parked in a small lot off a peculiar side road and decided to explore the designated trail. After about 5 minutes, we spotted a game camera without any identification. Game cameras on public land need to have ID info, and we thought that was really strange. We kept walking a bit, but I just didn't feel right about the camera or walking on this trail. So we turned around and went back to the truck instead of walking the last mile of the trail. When we returned to the truck, an old car pulled up with a couple inside. The man looked like a regular redneck, but the woman in the passenger seat seemed to be struggling to stay awake. As we walked out of the trail, the man looked surprised, and they lingered in the parking lot for a moment before driving away. Pretty sure they weren't looking to go for a hike. My guess is that was their camera and they get the notifications when people are on the trail so they can break into their cars. It happened to us on a family trip in Kentucky years ago, so maybe I'm just a little suspicious, but we decided no more backwoods hidden nature trails for us. This is quite unsettling, but I find it intriguing that someone would openly admit to being a typical redneck. What does it even mean to look regularly redneck? Here's a story. A couple of years ago, I was walking home from the bar at 1 a.m. Being a young woman in her 20s, I realized it was a foolish decision, but I was trying to save money by avoiding an Uber, and I was also quite drunk, so I wasn't thinking straight. I'm walking down a main but dark street and then a pickup truck driving by slows down next to me. Two men look at me and the passenger asks, "Hey, you need a ride somewhere?" I lie and say no thanks because I'm expecting one in a moment. They said all right and drove off. I watched them drive down the street and then a ways down, I saw their brake lights light up. There was no stop sign or stoplight, so I just assumed the worst and thought, I've got to get out of here. I ran into a tiny parking lot to my right and hid behind an outdoor vending machine. After a while, the two men arrived at the parking lot and drove around, obviously searching for me. When they didn't spot me, they left. I waited for a few moments before opting to hail an Uber. Yeah, definitely not the brightest choice there. That just goes to show the power of alcohol, okay. And even as an adult man, don't walk home at night, okay. It's a lot of dangerous people. So, spend the time getting an Uber. Story 10. When I was 17, I used to go for early morning jogs. My then boyfriend lived about 7 blocks away, so I would jog to his house. We would then run around a park together before heading back home. I started to notice a guy sitting in his car in the park, watching us run. After a week of this, I began seeing the same guy on my jogging route, close to my house. In addition to him being at the park, he'd sit in his car and watch me run, drive to the park, then watch me some more. My BF thought I was being paranoid about it all. One morning it was foggy out. I was in the middle of crossing the street when a car suddenly turned on its bright headlights, blinding me. I instinctively stopped and began to walk backward towards my house. As my eyes adjusted to the sudden brightness, I noticed that the man who had been observing me was standing next to his car with the trunk open. I noped out of there and went home. I never jogged there again. I reported it to the police. My BF's stepdad insisted, but they didn't seem to care. 2 years later, a 16-year-old girl was kidnapped, stuffed into a trunk, then driven out to the countryside. She was beaten, essayed, and then left there. By the description of the man in the car, I knew it was done by the same guy who watched me jog. They never caught him. This is all very horrible and just one of the many reasons I do not exercise. Story 11. We were in the woods at about 2 a.m., having a big bonfire in the middle of winter. There was about 7 or 8 feet of snow, and my friend and I were the only ones not drinking. After about 45 minutes, we both suddenly felt that something was off. Neither of us could quite explain it because we hadn't seen anything, but we knew there were animals in the woods. Grizzlies, wolves, and bobcats are all known to be there but generally leave larger groups and fires alone. We managed to convince the roughly 15 drunk guys to head back to the trucks a mile away, as a group, knowing at least the sober friend had a gun on her and could use it. We managed to get everyone into vehicles and back to town. The next morning, the skeptical individuals returned to inspect the area and discovered tracks from a pack of wolves that had been circling the clearing. Story 12. This was back in 2019. I was in college and there was a nice guy in one of my classes. A week or two in, we had to work together on a small project and I was pretty excited about the opportunity to get to know him. After speaking to him though, I got a really bad vibe from him, but nothing specific that I could put my finger on. I lost all attraction to him and I knew that I should keep my distance. He approached me a couple of times after the project, but I made sure to be pretty cool and distant though still polite. A month or two later, during the same semester, our professor, Mr. Baldwin, announced that the man had been arrested for killing someone he had been in a relationship with. A month or two later, in the same semester, our professor, Mr. Baldwin, announced that the guy had been arrested for killing a girl he had been dating, another student in our college, and it was an extremely brutal one. He gave us the number of the detective investigating the case in case we had any info to share. Talk about trusting your instincts. I mean, she had nothing to go on. She said she couldn't figure it out, but then. Story 13. This story is about my mom's gut feeling. When my brother and I were young, around 10 and 7, our family spent a summer with my aunt in Central Florida. My mom had taken us for a trip to a super Walmart and we came out with a shopping cart full of stuff for the couple of weeks we were planning to be there. On our way back to the van, my brother and I were fooling around while my mom pushed the cart. Suddenly, she said, "Get to the car, now," in a tone that was new to me. There was no room for argument, so we quickly crossed the parking lot and got into the unlocked van. And we waited. She caught up a few seconds later, loaded everything herself, and got in. As she sped away, she immediately used her Nextel to call our dad and told him that she had noticed a specific car with 2 men inside passing by us as we were walking towards the store, which gave her a really bad feeling for some reason. Sure enough, they had waited and began following us down the lot as we exited the store with a giant cart full of stuff and headed to our vehicle. My dad then called the police in the store to let them know. Lo and behold, some days later, 2 guys with that same car had been arrested for attempted mugging at that exact Walmart after multiple calls to the police had been made. It was only as an adult that I fully grasped the adrenaline rush my mother must have felt when she physically lifted that shopping cart and swiftly brought it across the median. Instead of having us walk to the next cart opening in the median or walk to the end of the aisle and come back up with those guys following in their car. Who's to say what would have happened? It was plain daylight and quite busy in the parking lot. But one thing is for sure, mothers don't mess around when their intuition kicks in. Story 14. I went to check out a culvert, which is like a covered stream, that I hadn't explored before. We didn't think it would be a big deal, so we didn't let anyone know where we were going or check the weather. When we were about 750 meters inside, my friend saw a lot of water coming in up ahead. We look at each other and go, "We need to get out." Now, in under 5 minutes, the water went from ankle deep and manageable to knee deep and almost pushing us over. We arrived at a section with some steps, a ladder, and a handrail for inspection. We managed to push the lid off, but the water was getting deeper by the minute. If that ladder had been 10 meters further, we might not have made it. If we had slipped, it would have been deadly. When we got out, it was raining gently. We were soaking wet and just looked at each other with that, "Oh no." Look. A bit more above ground exploring and we worked out that the culvert went under a local canal. If we'd slipped, we'd have ended up in a sump under a canal and likely never made it out. Nobody knew where we were, what was happening, or how to find us. In all likelihood, the only time they'd know where we died was when our corpses got spat out into the nearby river. A combination of stupidity and stupid good luck, I guess. Story 15. It wasn't a, let's get out of here, situation, but more of an, I can't leave it like this, moment. My girlfriend and I had just loaded up her car with a bunch of metal fence posts, stacking them in the back. As we were finishing up, I suddenly panicked as I realized that if we got into an accident, the pointed ends of the fence posts were aimed directly at us. So I turned the whole pile to be cockeyed, so it wouldn't be dead on. On the way home we hit construction. We stopped at the giant flashing traffic light. The guy behind us didn't. We got rear-ended by an SUV doing 60 plus. I instantly had the same flash of panic and looked over at my GF. She was fine. I looked down. I'm fine. I looked at the back of the car and saw that the fence posts were stuck in the sides of the car because the back of the car got damaged in an accident. I took my friend out for a drink for the first time since she had her daughter 12 weeks ago. We had a few drinks and then I went to the restroom. When I came back, I found her taking shots with a random guy at a table, and it made me feel upset. In his eyes, there was only malice. I clasped my friend's hand and exclaimed, "We're leaving right now." We departed without delay. The following day, I returned to settle the bill we had neglected, and the bartender informed me that the aforementioned individual had been apprehended for assaulting a woman outside the establishment. Story 17. I was walking home from 6th form one day and saw a car following me along the street. I was about 17. Edit. Misremembered my age. Got a really bad feeling so I hopped on the next bus with a plan to change directions and head home at the bus depot down the road. On the bus, I got a text from a guy who'd stalked me for years on and off with a picture of my school taken just then and the names and addresses of two of my friends. I freaked. I finally gathered the courage to tell my parents what had been happening. I also reported the incident to the police. Turns out, he had driven over 100 miles in an attempt to grab me and my friend. It was a close call for us because I decided to hop on the bus and my friend had gone home early. Finally told my parents what was happening. Reported it to the police. He'd driven over 100 miles to try and grab me and my friend and had just missed us cause I hopped on the bus and she had gone home early. He got 2.5 years in prison, suspended with orders not to contact any of the girls involved, immediately broke that order, and got another 5 years on top. I'm really glad I got on that bus. And people crap on public transportation. Sometimes it's the difference between living and dying. But seriously, how freaky is this guy? He stalked me for years on and off. Story 18. I and some friends were in downtown Vancouver watching Game 7, the Stanley Cup Finals, at a pub. When Vancouver lost the game, the street got rowdy. My friend wanted to stay and wait for things to calm down, but I had a bad feeling and suggested we take the next bus to Kitsilano. As we crossed the bridge, I looked back and saw trails of smoke from burning cars in the city. A huge riot ensued and it was absolute anarchy all night. They shut down transit shortly after we arrived home. You know I'm not a big hockey guy, but from this story, it sounds like Vancouver is to NHL what Philadelphia is to football. Rowdy fans. Story 19. In high school at a very shady friend's house, playing cards in the kitchen, one of the house residents comes running through and out the back door holding several illegal items. He's followed by the two roommates, who also have evidence with them. Two cops are closely behind. The cops go after the roommates through the back door, but one of them stops for a moment and tells us at the table not to move before heading out the back door. We're all shocked and look around for a few seconds before the four of us get up and run out the front door to a neighbor's house, where we hide for about 3 hours until everything calms down. Story 20. On a peculiar night, some of my friends were departing from a house party, and I attributed what happened to sheer luck more than anything else. This was ages ago when I was in my early 20s and we were all on the road just having fun. Some of us were inebriated and some of us were just high on life. I suddenly got an urge to get off the middle of the road. I found myself on a narrow one-lane road for no apparent reason, and I, a 5 feet 8 inches male weighing about 220 pounds, had to physically guide 3 girls off the road with my arms outstretched. Just as the girls were about to protest my actions, a reckless teenage driver zoomed past us in a flashy but inexpensive sports car. We would have all been mowed down if I didn't push everyone off the road. I wish this story ended there. Not even 5 minutes after he went past us, the driver of that car had swerved to avoid a stray dog on the road and had crashed at around 80 miles an hour into a stone wall. It seems he was 15 years old, and in my country, the minimum driving age is 18. He was the son of a millionaire. Is he okay? Did he pass away? Also, it's surprising that despite being the son of a millionaire, he drove a heavily modified inexpensive car. It seems that no matter how much money you have, you can still have poor taste. However, regardless of his behavior, I sincerely hope he's alive. Story 21. I've had a few, but one of the most prevalent that comes to mind is when my older sister and I were kids. I was 8 and she was either 10 or had just turned 11. My dad had just bought a new house that hadn't finished being built yet. We stayed at my grandpa's house for a month while our new house was being built. One day, while my sister and I were playing outside, I noticed a strange van turning the corner. I remembered what I had been told about suspicious white vans, so I paid attention to the details. Everything except the windshield was tinted. The driver saw us and started to speed up, and I just told my sister we needed to get inside. Right as my sister got up, I looked back at the van and saw a guy open the side sliding door and stare straight at us. We got inside and locked the door. I peeked through the window and saw the van slowly passing by while the person who opened the door was scanning the yard. When my mom got home about an hour later, I told her what happened. She agreed that we did the right thing by playing it safe and that we should always do so. However, I overheard her telling my dad later that it was probably nothing and that we let our imaginations get the best of us. It was a new place in a neighborhood we weren't comfortable in. So that must be it, according to my mom. The next morning my grandpa woke me and my sister up and told us that there were cops down the street and that a little girl had been abducted, and the police wanted us to tell them about the van we saw. The security cameras in a couple of houses down the street also captured the van, and my grandpa's next door neighbor had a security camera showing the van driving by with the side door open and a guy hanging out, looking into our yard. We moved into our new house before getting an update, but my grandpa attended the same church as the couple whose daughter had been abducted. The van was found along with the clothes the daughter had been wearing. Her body was found in the wetlands a few months later. If we hadn't trusted my gut, that would have been my sister, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I hate reading these stories sometimes. Story 22. The story begins one way but ends completely differently. I was on a bus in Romford, UK, and this guy was intoxicated, chatting with everyone and acting strangely. My friends had a gut feeling that things were taking a dangerous turn, but I didn't sense it. We got off the bus, and here's where things took a turn for the worse because, at 18, I was being foolish. As the bus pulled away, I shouted something dumb at it. Imagine a bus wanker but pre the in-betweener, so probably not that good. The bus was moving and suddenly the fire exit door at the back of the bus flew open and the drunk rolled out the door, hit the ground, and started running towards us holding something. I can't recall if it was actually dangerous or just appeared that way. He was holding something in his hand, looking red-faced and angry, so we all scattered in different directions. I decided to join a queue to look like I was going into a club, while some guys went down an alleyway. The drunk man went around the street shouting for me to come out and face him, even checking the queue I was in, searching it as though he was in Jurassic Park. I kept quiet, and after what seemed like forever he turned and walked off down the road towards where the bus had been to see if we were there. All of my friends were understandably furious with me when we caught up at our destination. The two that went down the dead-end alleyway were convinced he was going to unalive them if he found them. Nearly 20 years on, they still rib me about my lack of awareness and how ridiculously dumb I was. We got very lucky. Story 23. My mom's bad feelings might have saved me as an infant. While strolling through her suburban neighborhood with me in a stroller, she suddenly felt a tingling sensation as if someone was watching her. Therefore, she promptly turned around and decided to head back home. A few streets ahead, she became aware of a car trailing her at a slow pace. The driver, a man, was gazing at both her and me. She quickened her pace, and to her alarm, noticed that he accelerated to match her speed. So she gets really scared. Before she can start running, this is the 90s and she didn't have a cell phone, he rolls down the window and tells her to not run or stop because she's being stalked by a coyote. He saw her safely to our doorstep and then pointed out the coyote, who had followed us half a mile and looked ragged and desperate. It had been slipping from brush to brush looking for an opening. So glad for her intuition and the stranger's help. Story 24. I had passed Amy Bishop, UAH, a biology professor, on the third floor on her way to the faculty meeting where she executed 3 of our professors and attempted to unalive more, as well as herself. As I left the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was rather peculiar and always gave me the creeps. On my way home to my apartment, I missed several calls while driving and quickly gathered my things from my previous lecture on the first floor. Having missed so many, the first I returned was to my mom, who was hysterical. She just kept saying, "You're alive. You're alive." I was bemused by what she meant. I said, "Should I not be?" And that's when I learned people had been trying to check on my location due to the shooting happening. Edit. I guess it didn't register with me since I wasn't a faculty member, but it was the first thing that came to mind. It felt so surreal to come home and realize that so many people had suspected I was dead. In some ways, this is even more frightening. There was no inkling, no intuition, no feeling that I needed to leave or anything. It was just pure luck and chance that I happened to leave the place where so many horrible things had occurred. Like there was there was nothing. So just by the grace of God. Wow, that's scary. Story 25 was on my first solo trip to the US when I was around 34. Male and straight, stayed in a fairly remote Texan campsite and decided to go for a little trek. End up hitting a parking bay. It was about 4 to 5 p.m. and nobody else was around. Then some guy in his mid-40s rolls up in a van. Starts talking. All seemed normal. Enough until he asked if I wanted to go for a ride and smoke with him. I politely refused. Then he mentioned that a bug had crawled down my top. Without thinking, I lifted my top, and then he commented on having nice chest hair. I told him I needed to rejoin my group and started walking in the opposite direction. The guy then started to reverse and became somewhat pushy, insisting that we go for a ride. I quickly made my way back to the trail and started running. No idea if he was just some strange friendly guy, a potential thief, serial killer, or serial essayer, or if I accidentally stumbled into a meet-up place for gay men. Glad I didn't stick around to find out anyway. Story 26. When I was 14 or 15, we had a class trip to a well-known beach a couple of states away for a long weekend. One night, I was walking with 3 other girls down the main part of the city and a man approached us. Asked if we liked tattoos. We all said yes, then we would love to get one, but that we weren't old enough. He casually brushed off any concerns, saying, "Oh, don't worry about that. My guys do tattoos for anyone, as long as you keep it discreet," while giving a wink. At that moment, I began to feel uneasy. He guided us through an alley to a small, inconspicuous establishment with a hefty metal door. Upon opening it, we found ourselves in a dimly lit room with only a faint red glow, where about 5 guys were working. My whole being said, "Get the F out. Now." I screamed, "Run," and I ran until I got back to the hotel. I'm ashamed I never even looked for the other girls until the next day. A few days later, our class was shown a newspaper article that showed the guy who approached us along with several other men. They were arrested in connection with a trafficking ring. Our 14 to 15-year-old selves were almost trafficked. Niche. Story 27. My mom had a strong intuition that saved our lives. One day, when my brother and I were kids, we were driving to an appointment with the doctor on the airbase. Suddenly, my mom felt very sick and turned the car around. She explained that she had a bad dream the night before about us being in danger at the hospital and couldn't shake off the feeling. That same afternoon, a shooter attacked the facility we were supposed to visit. He was shot dead by the police, I believe. Had we gone in, all 3 of us would probably be dead. I do not mess around when my mom has had bad dreams anymore. There needs to be more science or something like investigative research on what is a mother's instincts and intuition, because they, I swear, are just on the ball. Always. Story 28. Last year, I went to Miami for my holidays. As I was traveling solo, I used the couch surfing app a lot, not only to find hosts but to meet people to hang out with. This one guy texted wanting to go out for some drinks or go dancing. Since I was by myself, I didn't feel at ease venturing out at night, so I declined. However, he persisted, suggesting activities like going to the beach or grabbing a drink in the afternoon. I noticed that he had only 3 reviews, all from girls, but they were positive. Still, I felt that he wanted something more to happen, which was not what I wanted, so I kept declining his offers. The next day, a girl's profile who I hadn't spoken. She texted me, wanting to meet me to hang out. We chatted a bit, and lo and behold, she was with this guy and wanted me to meet with them. I mentioned that I had gone to visit some other place a bit far away, so I wasn't going to make it. She started insisting, saying that this guy could pick me up because he had a car, and something about it just didn't sit right with me. I had a gut feeling telling me not to go, so I came up with an excuse and stopped responding to their messages altogether. A few days later, I had a conversation with my host from SEAS about the importance of staying safe while traveling. I expressed my discomfort with a previous situation where I felt rude for refusing without a solid reason. He reassured me, saying that it's always better to be safe than sorry, and shared a conversation he had with the girl who stayed with him before me. She had gone to visit a place with a guy from SEAS, who was supposed to host her afterward. By the end of the day, he took her to a hotel, not his place. She felt weirded out by it but said nothing. He fixed them some drinks. She only had one and immediately felt tired, so she fell asleep on the couch. She woke up the next morning naked in bed, feeling drowsy and funny. She said that she wasn't sure if anything had happened cause she couldn't remember anything after falling asleep on the couch, but she felt scared and confused, so she got the heck away from there. After sending him a message, she also sent a snapshot of the guy's profile. It turned out to be the same guy who had been chatting with me earlier. I've never felt so scared, horrified, and relieved all at the same time. This just goes to show, always trust your instincts, even if you feel foolish or impolite. In short, a guy contacted me to meet up when I was alone on vacation. Get the weird vibe, so I declined. Later learned that he apparently drugged, and possibly more, another girl. Gross, heartbreaking, scary, sad. I don't like it. I hate it. I strongly dislike it. The moral of the message is very true. If you feel uncomfortable or silly and don't have a good reason to decline, don't worry about it. Just say no. Story 29. My dad is a truck driver and has always told me if you were on the interstate near a semi and smell burnt rubber, get away from them because they are about to blow a tire. On my way to work one day, I suddenly caught a whiff of burnt rubber. I noticed a semi-truck driving alongside me, so I quickly accelerated to pass it. As I looked into my rear view mirror, I was shocked to see a massive collision, causing one car to go airborne and flip over. I called the accident 911 and then watched the news and papers for the rest of the day. Thankfully no fatalities, but it was nasty. The semi blew a tire and the car next to it hit the middle lane, swerved to avoid the tire fragment, and hit the car in the lane, causing it to flip. I would have been right in the middle of it all. I've never heard that information and I'm going to take that going forward. Oof. Story 30. Quite the opposite, but this happened over 15 years ago, around 2001 or 2002. My aunt made the trip from Atlanta to pick me up for a week-long visit with my cousins. Everything seemed fine, but before we hit the road, I insisted that she stop at a gas station that still offered full service. I was only about 13 at the time, but I wanted to make that stop. It started to rain hard while we were there and I begged her to stay until she could see the road better. It only rained for about 6 to 7 minutes and we were on our way. About 10 miles up the road we hit the small town of Abbeville, Al. We saw smoke in the air which alerted us to slow down. We pulled up to the only major intersection of the town to see it was completely leveled. There were road guards wrapped perfectly around the trees. We witnessed the aftermath of a devastating tornado. The once standing factory and gas stations were reduced to rubble. Even the high school was not spared. We immediately dialed 911. The dispatcher advised us to stay put and keep an eye out for anyone in need. Shockingly, we learned that a tornado had ripped through the town just 10 minutes before we called, leaving a path of destruction. What's alarming is that there were no sirens or alarms to warn us. The fact that we had made it there before any EMS always stuck with me because it could have been us too. Story 31. And a buddy was hanging out with these two girls we met at a bar. They invite us back to their place where we meet up with a bunch more people. As the night goes on, the party winds down and a few people leave. Then one of the girls starts talking about having an orgy and all of a sudden the other girl is like, "F yeah, let's do it." Even in my drunken state I still had the wherewithal to look around and count. It's getting late, and there are 9 guys, including me, and 2 women. No matter how you slice it, things are a bit chaotic. I decided it was time to leave, but my friend Tim insisted on sticking around to see how things would unfold. Tim essentially got excluded from the orgy and got to watch a bunch of dudes messing around while these 2 chicks went back and forth giving them some relations. That's pretty gross, yeah, pretty gross. Story 32. My buddy and I snuck out when we were about 14, roughly 10 at night, and we went to check out this little field by my house all surrounded by trees and had a little creek running through it. I wanted to see it lit up only by starlight. I started feeling very uneasy about a quarter mile away. We should turn around, man. I have a bad feeling. Aw come on booby face McGee, you're just scared. Dude, I'm telling you, you can go there but I'm turning around right now. Alright fine, he replied. The following day, we learned about a mountain lion attack that resulted in the unfortunate demise of a man's 2 dogs while he was walking them. Where did it happen? It occurred roughly a quarter mile from the field. When did it happen? Around 10:30, which was approximately 15 minutes after we had left the area. I do not doubt my subconscious recognized a big problem that I hadn't consciously noticed. Story 33. Greyhound left me in Santa Ana at 3 a.m. and told me to wait 4 hours alone for the next bus. Normally I'm very selective when I call Ubers, but for some reason, something told me I needed to leave right away. I realized that my hotel was only about 15 minutes away. Since I didn't want to wait for 4 hours, I decided to call an Uber. The Uber driver picked me up and I was on my way. I get in the car and tell him something along the lines of, "The man, they wanted me to wait 4 hours, and the station is closed, what the heck?" He says he's glad I called him instead of waiting for the next bus. I ask why. He says it's a dangerous area and a few weeks ago another girl decided to wait for the next bus and they essayed and robbed her. After a scary incident where nobody found her until the next day, I always make sure to carry pepper spray with me when I travel. This happened when I was 19 and buying marijuana with a friend. We went to a sketchy apartment in the Bronx with another person. This other person wasn't a friend of mine, he was more like a childhood bully. When we got to the building, we walked up a few flights of stairs and encountered 3 guys smoking in the stairwell. These are our dealers. I'm uncomfortable as heck. One of the crackheads tells me to stop being such a little bee. The 3rd guy chimes in and says if I'm going to be a little bee, I can leave. So I leave. A friend comes with me. Days later, we learned that the thieves attacked the 3rd person, stealing his wallet and phone, and causing serious injuries that required his jaw to be wired shut for a few months. Fortunately, I still have my phone and intact teeth. Also, it seems that the person who used to bully me during my childhood finally faced the consequences of his actions. I got a feeling, that you crackheads are about to jump you. Story 35. Not me, but when my mom was a teenager she started to date this older guy that my grandma had a really bad feeling about. Not just a, "I don't like that boy for you" thing, but a, "Stay away from him, something's wrong" feeling. She warns her against seeing him, prohibits her, and stops her from going to his place. One evening, she secretly leaves to meet him because he insists that he needs to see her that night. She gets to his house later, swarmed with cops. She found out he was luring young women to his house and unliving them and had uncovered several remains buried in his yard. I would say she learned her lesson, but my mom is a sweet soul. She tends to be very trusting and easily fooled because she always sees the best in people. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened again. Update for those who are curious, this happened in Florida in the late 60s. She mentioned that the person's name was Ozzy, most likely a nickname. Doesn't remember much else about it. She was a wild child and dated someone else after. Isn't there a Canadian dozer or somebody who also buried people? I can't remember. But either way, good on grandma. Story 36. A few weeks ago, I was on the subway with my friends and brother. We were heading to a park to enjoy the beautiful weather. After only one stop, the train suddenly stopped to pick up more passengers. Within seconds, around 50 football fans, who seemed to be running from the police, hurried onto the train. They are screaming, laughing, mocking, and insulting someone outside the train. We couldn't see who. The doors were supposed to close, but they didn't. I swear it felt like minutes. But 5 seconds later the train gets surrounded by police forces dressed in black armor and armed with batons and tear gas. I'm in horror. I glanced at my friends. It felt like time was moving slowly, and I had a million thoughts racing through my head in just a few seconds. Then I heard someone yell, "Run," and I sprinted away as fast as I could, without looking back. So a few hours go by and I look at the news. These cops were pulling football supporters out, throwing them, and beating them. Seconds after I ran from the train. While I was there I didn't see anything, but looking at the news it was a horrific show of fighting and beating. I swear it felt like minutes, but my friends told me it was 10 seconds max. Story 37. On a trip to Berlin, my partner and I were going to get the famous Mustafa's kebab. And on the way we stopped in a small shop to buy some beers. She got a feeling and said, "Let's leave." We left the shop and hadn't gone far when a man inside started yelling and throwing crates of beer bottles at people. He even threw some out the door and at the shelves with other bottles. It went from 0 to 100 in seconds, so we were lucky. We had delicious kebabs within the hour. It's like she's got a spidey sense for kebabs. Story 38. During my first year of college, 2 of my girlfriends and I were invited backstage before a show by a well-known hip-hop artist. We were escorted through a series of low-ceilinged rooms and ended up in a bunker-like pad with a large leather sectional, a coffee table covered in drugs and booze, and a few guys who, although not artists, were incredibly friendly and entertaining. While we all chatted, those 3 guys turned into 5, maybe 6, including some starry and silent types. These nice and funny guys kept pressuring us to have the coffee table stuff while we made increasing smiles and high-pitched, "No thank you," but had a little. Suddenly we heard the show starting. Sounding so far away, I said, "Oh, if the artist isn't coming backstage before his set, let's go back out so we don't miss it." One of the guys says he'll be smoking a joint with us on stage in like 15 minutes. Don't you want to wait to do that with him? That sounded cool, so we waited. As the event went on, everyone seemed to become more and more distant. The performer took a break and smoked some marijuana before meeting with us. Sadly, he seemed too high to talk to us and only focused on his friends. He turns back to the crowd, his posse moves us to the darkened edge of the stage just behind the curtains, and I'm feeling dizzier now, feeling confused. Not sure whose hands are on my body now. My friends are on either side of me, and they've each got a guy behind them feeling them up, which is the only way I realize that I too have a guy behind me feeling me up. We were taken backstage again, with a few people standing close behind each of us. The situation felt a bit uncertain. Someone mentioned that I was about to get something done that seemed impolite but also like a joke. In hindsight, it probably wasn't. We are being physically led to a room I can't remember seeing before. My friend calls out to me and another friend loudly in a candy-sweet flirtatious tone, "Hey babes, I have an idea and it's gonna sound crazy, but like, what if we just come here." She yanks us into a hug with her hands sliding down to our butts like we're all about to make out. Then she hisses, completely cogent for a split second, "We have to get the freak out of here right now." We were all walking together when suddenly she took my friend's hand, then mine, and led us out of the complicated backstage area. It felt like she guided us for 5 minutes without making any mistakes or running into any dead ends. Those other guys had no idea what was going on. We went from catatonia to teleportation. She didn't stop dragging us till we were out of the venue and several blocks away. Those are always so scary. I can't stand all these stories where someone gets a little tipsy or unsteady and people attempt to exploit them. Thank goodness they managed to escape. It's just terrible. Hopefully, my fake drunk girl voice wasn't too jarring and pulled you out of it. I tried. Story 39. My teenage son was running with the wrong crowd, the overprivileged, undersupervised troublemakers who always seem to be up to something. I suspected and I worried about him. Split custody and different parenting styles made it impossible to completely curtail his association with the group. After most of a year, my son suddenly began pulling back from these guys. No reason was given, just cold turkey. A month later, his buddies were arrested for shoplifting. Cops searched the car and found some drugs and automatic weapons. The son recognized where things were going and made changes before it was too late. Now, he works as a veterinarian, has a family with a wife and a young child, and has stayed out of trouble with the law. Story 40. Around 1 a.m., smoking weed with two friends under a small bridge behind some pillars, with no houses around for like 50 meters. Saw a group of guys talking to each other around 30 meters away from us. They split up, and one part of the group circled behind us. I told my friend that we had to get out of there right away, and we started running. When I looked behind us, I saw the two groups racing on their bicycles and stopping at the pillars. Can never be sure what would have happened, but doubt they were just gonna ask for a smoke. Story 41. I was working as part of a BA team in a house fire. We were in the converted roof space which was being used for a bedroom. We were standing in the doorway as the heat from the fire was strong and stopping us from progressing further. As we sat in the doorway, I just came over feeling very unwell. I had a bad feeling and started feeling sick. I told my partner that we should leave. While we were heading down the stairs, we heard the evacuation alarm. We dropped everything and bolted out of the house in time as the roof collapsed and crushed the first and second floors beneath it, right where we were standing. We got out with such speed that my partner practically threw himself down the stairs face first and had a minor hairline fracture to his elbow. Story 42. I had my wisdom teeth removed when I was 17. My mom didn't come to pick me up, so I had to wait for the bus while I was on painkillers and had bloody gauze in my mouth. I felt like something was wrong, but I was fuzzy-headed and couldn't focus. After around 10 minutes, a group of 3 guys approached me and began trying to persuade me to go with them. I couldn't speak and they started grasping at my arms, guiding me gently towards the nearby shopping mall garage. It seemed like they thought I was drunk and that they could simply steer me out of sight. On a Tuesday, that place was deserted. Up to this point, they had been nice, but insistent. I finally said, no, and my mouth started gushing blood down my chin and shirt. I was really scared and disoriented after a dental procedure, and when I managed to leave the office, some sketchy guys started following me. Luckily, I made it back to the dentist's office and the nurse called the police. It turns out those guys had been causing trouble in the area. After that incident, my dentist decided that no one could leave the office alone after getting anesthesia. My mother was mad that the police called her and asked her to pick me up, but that's a story for another day. Okay, look, these stories are all crappy, but don't rob the people that just got their wisdom teeth taken out. Okay, for one, they don't have the wisdom, but also, they're so out of it. They're just in pain. Leave them alone, gosh dang it. Story 43 was at a party a long time ago. I knew some of the guys from a local gang, but since I had grown up with many of them, I didn't see it as a major issue. A guy walks in and the whole sound level of the party goes down noticeably. I didn't know the guy or what was going on, but everyone all of a sudden looked super nervous and uncomfortable. A man walked in and didn't seem to notice or maybe care at all. He walked around talking to people who wanted nothing to do with him or whatever situation was brewing. He walked up to me and started talking. I honestly have no memory of what he said, but I do remember looking over at the gang members who were 100% staring right at me. That is when the feeling hit me and I decided to call it a night and left. Woke up the next morning to over a dozen texts about how that guy had snitched on one of the gang members and they nearly killed him after I left. The part that surprised me more is that for some reason those gang members had also severely beaten many people who that guy talked to at the party. I was able to reach out to a couple of them to clear the air that I didn't know the guy or what was going on, but I was told I avoided a very rough night of misunderstandings. Several years later, I saw the guys working at a food truck, and we talked about what happened. They did like a ghetto crucifixion, nailing his hands and feet to 2 X4s and then beating him with random objects they found around the house. Surprisingly, he seems to be doing much better from what I understand. This is about the 44th story. There was a stabbing near my workplace recently, and I was just about to go to the store where it happened. Something inside me stopped me from going, and it turns out it was a random stabbing, so it easily could have been me. Additionally, when I attended the Boston Marathon in the year of the bombing, I was heading toward the finish line. It would have been the first time we watched from there. My mom and I kept getting distracted on the way, and good thing we did, because when we were close and could see the tents they set up for emergencies, we saw people freaking out and we realized how lucky we were. Story 45. I was about 16 and incredibly naive when I got my first car. I went to the local Walmart and a random guy asked me for a ride. I usually don't give strangers rides, but he managed to convince me to take him back to his house, which was on my way. I felt uneasy the whole time he was with me. When we finally got to his house, he said, "Don't move, I'll be right back with $40 for the ride." I don't know what made me panic, but I caught a whole wave of screw this in my gut. I hopped on a curb to get out of the parking lot ASAP, and when I got about 200 or so feet away, I saw the dude in my rearview running outside with a gun. I don't want to know what would have happened, but my butthole puckers every time I think about it. Story 46. 4 of us girls were hanging out on a floating trampoline just offshore on a quiet lake. It was late spring, almost early summer, and we were all from different countries and relatively new to the area. As I looked up at the sky and noticed the grayish clouds, I suddenly had the feeling that we needed to leave as soon as possible. The rate of the cloud movement triggered my concerns. I simply thought we'd get all our things soaked and then we'd be freezing on our journey home. The weather here is usually benign but could be chilly. On the bright side, we managed to dash and just about catch a bus. The driver pulled over for us. We only just made it onto the local train before a heavy downpour started, followed by large hailstones. It lasted for a good 30 minutes, and we saw car windows getting smashed all around us. Some store and house windows too. Train lines were blocked by fallen trees and we got stuck for a while, but at least we were indoors during the storm. Had to hitchhike home in the end. We would have been in seriously bad shape, and cold, if we'd still been sitting outside. If I had to guess, this is Ohio. Story 47. I was in our backyard with my son, and he was playing on his little playset under a massive, ancient tree. Soon, it started drizzling, and the wind picked up. Being from Seattle, I don't normally care if he plays outside in the rain, but I said to my kid, "This is very out of character for me, we need to go inside now before the wind takes you away." He came inside. Just as the door closed behind him, a branch snapped off the tree and landed on and crushed the playset he had been standing on 3 minutes earlier. If he'd still been there, it would have fallen on his head. Story 48. 6 years ago, I had a photography internship at a newspaper and borrowed my friend's camera for it. While riding my motorbike one night during the monsoons, I decided to stop halfway on my way home to see if I could catch some lightning. I live far from the city and ended up in the middle of nowhere with no streetlights. As I stopped, I noticed 3 men on a motorbike passing by, with all 3 of them on the same bike. I didn't take notice until I saw them make a U-turn and pull up to where I was. They casually asked me what the time is, which I tell them. This is when I felt something was off, but I kept my cool. They said thank you, turned around, and appeared to continue on their way. I put the camera around my neck, got on my bike, and started heading home. Before long, I saw car lights behind me. They circled back again. Dang, they rode right next to me and began trying to kick me off the road. Somehow I was not fearful as I began kicking back as well. Out of nowhere, I decided to brake. It was not a great choice as I fell off my bike. 2 people got out of a vehicle and started running towards me. I managed to get back into the vehicle before they reached me. One of them grabbed my jacket, but I was already speeding away. The guy on the bike tried to chase me for a bit, but then I pulled a fake out again and braked. He thought I was taking a U-turn, but I didn't. His mates were still running on foot, so he either had to chase me alone or go back for his mates. He chose the latter. I got away. The camera was safe, even though I fell. I'm just baffled as to what kind of bike this guy had that 3 of them were keeping up with this singular guy. Story 49. My family almost died in a tsunami. I was super young and obsessed with the beach, but on that particular day, I felt a sudden urge to explore the city instead. Despite the perfect beach weather, I begged my parents to take me to the city. Our hotel was exactly in front of the beach. My parents wondered what was going on, but they still brought me there. Probably 1 to 5 hours later there was a huge and sudden tsunami. No warning, just everyone screaming and running away from the beach. We ended up getting injured, but somehow we made it out alive. It's crazy to think about what might have happened if we hadn't insisted on going to the city. Probably our bodies are still missing in the sea. Story 50. In high school, I was attending a show of local punk bands at a local indoor skate park. One of the bands yelled, "Screw Nazis," and my friend and I immediately got nervous and climbed up on the half pipe to stay out of the fray we were expecting. Nothing happened though. About 20 minutes later, still high up, I noticed someone pushing the crowd aggressively. I gently pushed my friend to get his attention. When we looked around, we noticed a large group of around 10 intimidating-looking people with shaven heads gathered at the entrance. We immediately realized it was time to leave. At this time it was a common skinhead tactic to send in a small guy to disrupt and antagonize until someone boiled over. Once the fight started, these big scary skinheads would join the fray and turn it into a melee. It could be dangerous even if you weren't involved. We grabbed the girls we were with and bolted for a side door. As we were leaving we heard the music stop and shouts and screams start. We didn't look back. We heard later there were a bunch of hospitalizations including a stab wound. The skate park got in big trouble because the show was clandestine and there was no security. Total crap show. I don't get why someone shouting, "Screw Nazis," would be seen as a warning sign. I feel like everyone would be like, "Yeah, I agree," and just be supportive. I don't understand why it would be seen as a bad thing for someone to say that. Maybe I just have no survival instincts because I would have stuck around. Story 51. In my 20s, my brothers and a couple of friends were traveling through Europe. We were on a ship traveling to Riga. Since we're all really into nerdy stuff, instead of hanging out at the bar or casino, we spent our time exploring the ship because we wanted to see all the cool stuff on board. Problem with exploring a boat late at night in certain parts of the world, however, me and my buddy are walking down the halls on one of the lower levels. A couple of the employees had barked at us in Finnish, I think, to get upstairs. We were too far down, but they were too busy to care that much. After some time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following us. The boat had Wi-Fi, so I messaged my brothers to meet us at a specific location and asked my friend to stop talking. I thought there was a good chance we were being followed because the people following us might have mistaken us for Americans. Meet up with my brothers, a quick motion of the eyes and a barely passable sentence in French clues them in. My brothers were fluent in French and Spanish, but I wasn't. One of my brothers spoke German and so did I. So I continued very loudly in German. The morning after, my brother and I were having a great time talking about football, but there was some trouble on the cruise ship. It turns out that there had been a group of criminals causing problems, and one person even got hurt. It was pretty scary, but fortunately, the situation was taken care of by the police. The majority of the victims were Brits and Americans. I'd never really felt a need to leave instinct before, and I still attest that it could have been purely coincidence. But I'm not going to argue against that feeling either. There was no downside to leaving and going to bed, and many possible downsides from lurking around there. Story 52. I can't remember the exact year, but it's gotta be around 05. I had just gotten married and my husband had to travel to Las Vegas for a work assignment during the holidays. His company arranged for him to stay in a nice hotel suite, so he had to be in Las Vegas for New Year's Eve. That year, there was a big event scheduled on the Las Vegas Strip with lots of fireworks for the countdown. Kind of like a Las Vegas version of Times Square on steroids. So we went down there a little before midnight. The show was good, but just before the countdown they started closing casino floors and locking the doors on the strip. I think they didn't want people to come back in large numbers. The street in that area had a fence, so we had to stay on the sidewalk. I started feeling claustrophobic, so I grabbed my husband and told him, we need to leave. So we just started making our way through the crowds toward the side street when the countdown happened. We still got stuck, but luckily we were a little more out of the way. When the countdown was over, everyone left at the same time, but there was nowhere to go. People started filing off the pedestrian bridges, shoving and pushing to the point where I was actually lifted off my feet and just shoved by the crowd. The doors to the casino next to us almost broke open with the amount of people being smashed into them. I am grateful we started leaving early, because at the place I was at, several people crushed and trampled. A man in a wheelchair was pushed out of it, and I'm not sure what happened to him because he disappeared into the crowd without his chair. Eventually, we were pushed toward the street I was trying to reach. There were about 6 police officers just sitting there, not doing anything. From their vantage point, they couldn't see any of the crush, though I have no idea why they couldn't hear the screaming. My husband went and talked to them and they went off running to do crowd control. Later found out several people got injured, never did find out what happened to that handicapped guy. We were so amped up on adrenaline that we decided to just cut out early and drive home that night. Story 53. When my parents first got married, I think my brother was quite young. Just before my dad's return from Hong Kong, they had a conversation on a payphone. However, he never arrived, and later we learned from the news that his flight had crashed in the middle of the ocean. No survivors. My mom was hysterical. A few hours later my dad comes walking through the door. He mentioned that he arrived at the airplane and the doors were about to close. He took it as a sign and felt uneasy about it, so he chose to take the next flight instead. My dad isn't usually superstitious, so this decision was unusual for him. He didn't feel the need to call again because it was only a couple of hours. He wasn't aware of the crash. Holy crap, I hope that someday I'll have strong instincts that I can rely on. I hope I won't ignore them if I ever need to use them. Story 54. I hope I'm not late, but one day, I was taking a relaxing hot bath, as I love to do, when I was just chilling in the tub. I started to feel so relaxed that I was slowly getting sleepy. Pretty normal thing in a hot bath, but then I remembered that a water heater fueled by gas installation was acting weird for a couple of days. I got scared because I realized I could get carbon monoxide poisoning. I tried to get out of the bathtub, but I just fell on the floor. I crawled naked out of the bathroom and took a deep breath of the fresh air. The next couple of days I couldn't move out of my bed because of an extreme headache, which, as I read later, was one of the symptoms of monoxide poisoning. If I would have fallen asleep there, I would be dead now. Sorry for my English and spelling. Stay safe, boys. Story 55. When my car broke down in a not so great area at night, I called my boyfriend and asked him to stay on the phone with me until he arrived 20 minutes later. I kept an eye on my rearview mirror to make sure that anyone walking past my car went all the way past it. I see one guy walk past my car but never see him go past the rearview mirror. I tell my boyfriend, he's waiting for me to get off the phone. He didn't walk past. My boyfriend doesn't believe me and thinks I'm being paranoid when I get worried about things. But then something strange happened. When my boyfriend came to pick me up, he popped the hood of my car. At the same time, a guy suddenly popped his head up from the barrier next to the road and offered to help us. It was a really weird coincidence. When my boyfriend gets in his car, I tell him, that's the guy who didn't walk past my car. He agrees that he was likely waiting for me to get off the phone and that he was super creepy. Anyway, I'm glad that nothing really bad happened. This is another lesson for people adjacent to people with feelings. Don't call him paranoid. Don't question the feelings, okay? Because just instincts and intuition, even if it's over the top, just follow it. Okay? Just don't ever write it off. Story 56. I've been a social worker for a while now, and I've had some interesting experiences during home visits. There was this one time when I drove out to meet a single mom with 3 young kids who lived in a remote area. As soon as I got out of the car, I realized it wasn't a great situation and decided it was time to leave. Because she'd stopped answering the phone or responding to the other attempts to contact me, she had a pretty bad DV history, so I was worried. Got out there and had a feeling something was wrong immediately. Her van was gone and I knew it had expired tags, plus she had a suspension on her DL. As I arrived, I noticed that one of the upstairs windows was broken, and an eerie silence filled the air. As I got out of the car, a shiver ran down my spine. My home visit partner, with whom I always go out for safety, quietly urged me to get back in the car, insisting that we needed to leave. Once we reached the end of the driveway, she informed me that she had spotted a man who resembled my client's ex hastily retreating into an outbuilding. I couldn't have seen him from where I was. Had I gone up to the door, he'd have been maybe 10 inches from me. Story 57. My subconscious saved my butt once. In the days of yore, I was known for disappearing in the middle of nights out. As many young idiots do, I sometimes drank too much and blacked out. When I did, my adult brain said, "Run away." Woke up in my bed feeling quite fearful and might have been missing a shoe. This occurred one night, but I had only consumed 2 beers. And no drugs. It's hazy, but I remember coming to a taxi home and vomiting everywhere. Could barely make it to my door. Vomited in the hall and got to bed and passed out. I spoke to my roommates the next day and they told me that I had suddenly become unwell at the beginning of the night and then disappeared. They weren't worried because our housemate had told them that I had made it home safely. I found the taxi driver's number in my bag. I called the driver to pay for the cleaning of the taxi after I vomited and I apologized a lot. And he was incredibly nice, only charged like 30% of the cleaning fee. As he said he, with vast experience of drunk students, said he knew something wasn't right about my behavior. Instead I kept apologizing between pukes and saying, "I'm so sorry, I've only had 2 pints, I swear." Pretty sure someone dosed my drink and I thanked God for my finely honed flight reflex telling me to get the frick out of there. My housemate said some creeper had asked them where I was several times that night. Story 58. Many years ago when I was much younger, I was driving home from the gym. There was a biker off to the side of the road. His Harley had broken down. He asked if I could give him a ride. He was going not too far from my home, so I said sure. We made small talk. He asked if I was afraid of him. I said no, I'm bigger than you and I work out. He sized me up and said, "Yeah, fair enough." We got to where he was going. It was a local clubhouse. Asked me to come in, and he'd get me a beer. The least he could do for give him the ride. I agreed to it. Many people were at the house on a weekday, savoring cold drinks, when a very appealing lady sat down beside me on the couch. She scooted closer and made herself comfortable. Very friendly, very chatty. As we were chatting, I asked why there were so many people over. Was it a party or something? She said her husband had just gotten out of jail. They were celebrating. He had beaten a guy badly for flirting with his wife, who was now snuggled up next to me on the couch. But don't worry, I find this situation amusing. The husband was seated on the couch next to us, gazing at me intently. Right in front of me, the pit bull had its face just a foot away from my crotch, also staring at me. I had a sudden moment of clarity as I took this scene in and realized I needed to leave. Immediately. Excused myself, thanked everyone for the hospitality, and bailed. Realized as I was leaving, it was the local clubhouse. Story 59. Not sure if this counts, but my mom saved me from being kidnapped. I was 3 at the time, and I was playing in the park with my mom watching me. She glanced away for a second and realized I was no longer there. Concerned, she hurried across the hill behind the park. I was holding hands with a woman who was guiding me to her car. My mom ran up, grabbed me, and took off. Police later pulled the woman's car over to find children's clothes and shoes in her trunk and backseat. Another time was more recently. I was with my mom, grandma, and brother. We were coming home from a vacation when we saw the night sky turn red. We thought, oh, it must be a Beachy Creek fire. All of a sudden, we had to stop because there was a line of cars in front of us. We found out that the road was blocked because some trees had fallen. We tried to go back the way we came, but that was also blocked by 2 more fallen trees. My mom all of a sudden said, "We need to get out of here, now." We went up to help clear the 3 trees with a hatchet we had in the back. We managed to clear 2 of the 3 as the third was too big to cut through. As we were heading back to our car, we narrowly avoided 4 more trees falling on the road. Just as we were leaving, we spotted a hillside engulfed in flames. The following day, we had to evacuate, and later learned that the area where we had stopped had been completely consumed by fire just 5 minutes after we departed. Story 60. I was attending what I was told was a very small get-together, 5 to 6 people, for a friend's college graduation. This was a few months ago amid COVID, and the party was for my wife and my absolute best friends in the world. We had already been quarantined for close to a month and had negative test results a few days before attending. When we arrived, 20 minutes early, there were already more than 10 people there. Nobody was wearing masks or keeping a safe distance from each other. Food platters were uncovered and a guy was barbecuing for everyone without a mask on. When my friend answered the door, thinking quickly, I interrupted my wife and said, "I'm so sorry we have to do this to you, but on our way here, I got called into work. They know we have one car and wouldn't have been able to split up." And we handed over her gift and said goodbye. A few days later, found out everyone at that party tested positive. Story 61. Anytime I'm out at night and a guy starts to catcall me. Edit. I should tell a story. I worked in the city and this day I got off late at night. I usually feel safe, but today I decided to get on the first train that comes, even if I have to transfer. Normally, I wait for my train because I don't like transferring, but today I saw a group of men near the train stop and they started yelling at me. "Yeah, girl, hurry, you'll miss the train or you should hang out with us instead of getting on that train" and other crap. I'd rather not mention it as I just missed the train. And so I had to wait like 10 minutes for another one. And so I walked down and stood at the other end of the stop. So I didn't have to be near that group. And if they got up to me, I could book it to the next stop, which was at the plaza, and even at night more people are there. They ignored me, perhaps because they didn't realize I was at the other end, or maybe they were too out of it due to drugs or alcohol. Once they noticed me, they began saying things like, "You should come over here and let us warm you up," or, "It's going to be a long time until the next train," which was incorrect because the train was coming. Then they suggested that they should sit next to me on the train, and urged me not to leave, insisting that I play with them. They even started to get up to walk over to me. The train arrived and I quickly boarded. I'm not sure if the other people managed to get onto a different part of the train, since it's not possible to move from one end of the train to the other. It's like having two separate trains, with one pulling the other. I'm also not sure if they didn't have a ticket to board the train. That's probably why there are more ticket checks at night. However, the personnel didn't come to my side of the train. Nighttime can be quite scary, even for me, and I can only imagine how frightening it must be for women, especially with men calling out to them. It's like living in a thrilling horror video game. Stay safe, everyone.